Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, today during spoiler season, it started off like any other spoiler season day. We got some exciting cards like, Slip Out the Back. It's a really good card. Make sure you check that episode out at some point. We also got to see a new commander with Rigo Streetwise Mentor, and one that I think is going to be really annoying, but that's not all that new either. And then we also got what might be a nastier Terrastaton with Soul of Emancipation, and even though, okay, that is very new, but when it comes to spoiler season, not quite as shocking as what's on this episode, because, yeah, there was a massive Precon leak. This is the last day of official spoiler season. The Precons are not going to be spoiled until early next week, I believe. I think Monday and Tuesday. But yeah, I definitely did not anticipate on the last day of spoiler season getting a giant influx. I mean, I'm talking like 20 plus cards spoiled early. So yeah, needless to say, I'm just a bit thrown off. So I literally clipped together the cards from the images as quickly as I could, and now I literally am just going to pretty much talk about them without having seen them ever before on this episode. So get ready for that. The most raw quick take that I've ever done, I think. So here we go. And of course, I am bound to make mistakes on this episode, so when I do, blame it in the comments below. Now here we go. Now, overall, I believe if I'm remembering things correctly, there were 5 pictures in the leaks, and each had, a certain amount of cards. Here's the first one that I'm going to go over, and actually, we've already seen Henzi Toolbox Toray, which was actually spoiled by Wizards, I believe on their announced stream quite a while ago, and I already did an episode on that one. I also already did an episode on the Beamtown Bullies, which also has come out before this point. And now, yeah, Jolene, the Plunder Queen, that is one that we have not seen. So, yeah, look at that fancy, card clipping job that I did. My apologies, these are gonna look not my best. I try my best. Okay, here we go. Jolene the Plunder Queen is a 2/2 human warrior that costs 2 red and a green. She has, whenever a player attacks one or more of your opponents, that attacking player creates a treasure token. On top of that, if you'd create one or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus initial treasure token. And by sacrificing 5 treasures, you put 5+1 counters on Jolene. Okay, so initial thoughts on this card. Again, this is really my first time seeing it. I didn't really read the cards when I was clipping them. Here we go. This kind of seems like Edric, essentially, but for treasures. So, instead of this being obviously Simic, attack other players, draw cards, this is Gruul, attack other players, make treasures. So yeah, that seems like a very powerful thing, and definitely a way to incentivize your opponents to attack each other, because yeah, making treasures and getting temporary mana, essentially like Lotus Petals, is a very powerful thing. And keep in mind, those treasures do come into play untapped, so players can utilize those right away. Now, obviously, this does differ from Edric in that there is a further limitation in that this says whenever a player attacks one or more of your opponents. So, no matter how many players a player attacks, they are only making 1 treasure. Now, obviously, the same applies to you, but actually it kind of also doesn't, because, again, you basically kind of have, I believe the card is Zorn. It starts with an X. Zorn, I think it is. Essentially, that middle part, if you're going to make 1 or more treasures, you instead get an additional treasure. So, essentially, again, by attacking a player, you only have to attack 1, you get 2 treasures. So, still, yeah, some low-to-the-ground, evasive, maybe hasty creatures could definitely be impactful with this kind of a commander. Now, how many of those treasures are you actually going to sacrifice to, pump your commander? I'm really not sure. I mean, if you can just make an entire, stash of treasures and then swing with Jolene and your opponent doesn't know kind of how to block, then that might be impactful. Because, yeah, with enough treasures and maybe like a doubling power effect, you might be able to one-shot or two-shot an opponent with this commander. But yeah, you typically don't want to waste 5 treasures for 5 counters. It seems like a lot of, potential mana spent essentially for, not a giant effect. I mean, you probably just want to invest in other ways to make even more treasures, and yeah, there are plenty of creatures out there that make treasures when they come into play, or other effects that make treasures, and some of them kind of might even pay for themselves with this commander now. Again, I'm just doing this from memory at this point and not, using Scryfall for searching. But I think Wily Goblin costs red and makes you a treasure when it comes into play. So yeah, that basically just pays for itself now because you're getting 2 treasures instead of just the 1. So yeah, I think a lot of players are going to be excited about this kind of, Edric-ish style kind of treasure making commander that, benefits all players by making players treasures, but also, benefits you more so. So it's going to incentivize your opponents to attack each other, which is great. But you're going to be the, queen of treasures because you're going to be making more every single time you do. That being said, and I probably should have mentioned at the beginning, but please take this entire episode with a grain of salt because, well, these cards have not been officially confirmed to be, actual cards in the precons. But I think that these would all be very, very hard to fake. This would be a lot of work, and these are really well done. So yeah, I think they're pretty real. And yeah, some of these cards like this one, are showing up in pictures that are next to other cards that we know are real. Regardless, moving on. This is the second picture that I'm going to be highlighting, and as you can see, if you actually saw my most recent episode, which is really ironic, it's on Soul of Emancipation, I was doing that episode, I was recording it, when these images apparently came out, and Eddie sent me over the link to it and was like, hey, this is happening. I'm like, oh no, okay, well, here we go. So yeah, I'm not going to talk about Soul of Emancipation because I've already done that one, but there are 2 other cards obviously on this that I have not talked about. So, again, look at that lovely crop job. I mean, you can even see in the bottom left right there, the other card coming in. Anyways, Bennie Bracks, Zoologist. Bennie Bracks is a 3/2 elf druid that costs 3 and a white. That's right, a mono white commander. Let's see what it does. It has Convoke, so your creatures can upcast this spell, and at the beginning of each end step, if you created a token this turn, draw a card. This card is massive, and I can't even comprehend it because I think, Wizards doesn't do this. They do not allow this. They do not allow mono white to get this kind of card draw. There is always, always, always some bigger limitation to it. I mean, the limitation you'd probably expect on this is like at the beginning of your end step, but no, it's at the beginning of each end step. Every single end step, you have the opportunity to draw a card. That's to potentially 4 cards in one trip around the table, which, yeah, is very doable with a token strategy in mono white. And, of course, there are a ton of token decks in mono white, so yeah, this is just a slam dunk in every single one of those decks, essentially. Now, this card's probably going to be very, very expensive because of that, but yeah, I mean, as a commander, this commander probably has the most potential out of any commander in mono white, even including Mangara, to actually draw you the most cards consistently. Because now, essentially, yeah, just make a ton of tokens, draw a ton of cards, obviously, get spells to protect your army, there's plenty of them in mono white, that give all your creatures indestructible, or, if you've got the budget for it, Teferi's Protection or whatnot, but then you turn off your card draw if you do that, but still, I mean, it's going to be worth it to protect your team, regardless. If this commander gets dealt with, and you still have a good amount of creatures in play, of course, because of that Convoke, you can easily help recast your commander to then draw more. So yeah, this is a draw engine that's just going to keep going and going and going, and of course, there are plenty of ways to make tokens in mono white, and there are ways, repeatable ways to make tokens on other players' turns, so yeah, as long as you start getting those things out, you can just, make a token on an opponent's turn, and then draw a card. Then on the next turn, use that other thing that you have to make a token, and then yeah, there are plenty of effects that are fantastic. There are instant speed spells that can help you make tokens. And yeah, this commander is going to be, I'm not going to say the most popular mono white commander right now. That I might be jumping to conclusions with that a bit too quickly, even though this is the quickest of quick takes. But very, 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 very popular in mono white. Might be the most popular. Drawing cards is something that mono white has been waiting for such a long time. And this is a card that is going to be heavily, heavily, heavily used in mono white decks and is going to be a fantastic commander on its own. So I hope to see more mono white cards that don't have an absurd amount of restrictions when it comes to card draw in the future so that mono white can finally try to catch up to other colors. So in other words, thank you Wizards for this. Keep doing things like this. Thank you. Now, the next card that we saw is also a mono white card with Sanctuary Warden, a 5/5 Angel Soldier with flying that costs 4 white. Sanctuary Warden's going to enter the battlefield with 2 shield counters on it, and again, I don't have the exact text for shields in front of me, but basically it's like, hey, if this creature's dealt damage or would be destroyed, you just take the shield counter off instead. So kind of like 2 force bubbles on this creature to protect it. And whenever Sanctuary Warden enters the battlefield or attacks, you may remove a counter from a creature or planeswalker you control. If you do, draw a card and create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. So that seems really good. Again, repeatable card draw on a mono white card is something that we rarely see. Now, obviously, along with that, you get some token production, which is very nice, but yeah, you never see card draw that is repeatable in mono white, so here we go again. Now, obviously, one thing that you could do with this is, hey, okay, I'll get rid of my shield counters to actually draw cards and make tokens. But obviously, if you're going to be utilizing this in a deck and, getting a lot of value out of it, you're probably going to have other counters. So, yeah, plenty of +1/+1 counters out there. If you've got, say, Cathar's Crusade, that is going to be a fantastic way to get a ton of counters on your creatures. And obviously, then you've got plenty of counters to remove with this. And of course, Cathar's Crusade works incredibly well with this because when you do remove that one, +1/+1 counter, you draw a card, you make a creature token, which comes in play. Cathar's Crusade's going to make you, a ton of counters on more creatures, and yeah, it can just kind of be an engine that fuels itself. And of course, obviously, also in mono white, you've got ways to blink this, so you can take advantage of that ETB, and, if you are in Boros, let's say, you've got, extra combat spells and stuff like that to take advantage of the attack trigger. So yeah, a solid card, and again, if you can keep those shield counters on it, or, if you're in a proliferate kind of strategy, you can easily keep those shield counters on it. This can be really hard to deal with, okay, outside of a bounce spell or an edict effect, that kind of thing. But yeah, a very solid card for a good amount of decks out there that deal with counters and that want something that can repeatedly draw them cards. Next up, let's move on to another image. This one again has 3 cards, and it's got 3 cards that we have not seen so far with Swindler's Scheme, Riveteer's Confluence, and Weathered Sentinels. And let's tackle these one at a time. So, Swindler's Scheme is an enchantment for 2 in a blue, and it says, whenever an opponent casts a spell from their hand, you may reveal the top card of your library. If it shares a card type with that spell, counter that spell, and that opponent may cast the revealed card without paying its mana cost. What in the world is going on here? Again, this is literally my first time actually reading the card. Yeah, I cropped it for some images, but I didn't really read it. Oh my goodness. Okay, the first thing that came to my mind is I think this is like counterbalance, essentially. I think that's like blue, and basically counters spells if, they have the same mana cost. Yeah, this seems very strange, and I'm trying to figure out what kinds of decks are going to be utilizing this in a non-really janky but funny way. I mean, just on its face, I guess, if you maybe had, a bunch of tiny creatures in your deck or something like that and ways to manipulate the top of your library, you could, try to just keep, tiny things on top for when your opponents cast bigger things. I'm probably missing something here. People help me out. I mean, a different direction that you could go, and obviously you kind of have to build your entire deck around this, is to kind of have like a bad gifts deck, kind of like, Zedru, I guess. Maybe Zedru could just use this and you just might miscellaneously hit things off the top that, match what an opponent is casting, and then they have to cast a bad gift. So that could definitely be an option. But yeah, I mean, if you built an entire deck around this kind of effect, which actually that'd be pretty funny if a commander kind of had this effect, because, well, let's say you had a deck that had, Phage the Untouchable on top of your library, and an opponent casts a creature spell, well, that's just going to come into play under they control, and they lose the game. Because, they didn't cast it from their hand. Now, obviously, that takes a good amount of work, and yeah, I think to build around this card, you need a lot of library manipulation, and again, outside of like maybe a Zedru deck, I'm not exactly sure what kinds of decks are going to want to just randomly give your opponent, something that might be better than what they cast. I mean, it's kind of like Possibility Storm in a way, so yeah, I mean, Zedru and Chaos decks, go for it, and please let me know in the comments below if I'm missing something with this one. I very well might be, but yeah, Phage, do it! Next up, we've got Riveteer's Confluence, and actually, there are, 5 cards in a Confluence cycle already. I believe those are monocolored, though, and this might just kind of indicate that we actually are getting a Confluence cycle now, one for each of the families. I'm just going to be guessing that. That seems like something that this would indicate. Don't hold me to that, though, and actually, it's going to be really ironic if there's any other Confluence card in these spoilers, because I haven't read them. Anyways, a sorcery for 2, black, red, green. It says choose 3, you may choose the same mode more than once. You draw a card and you lose 1 life. Riveteer's Confluence deals 1 damage to each creature and each planeswalker you don't control. You may put a land card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. So yeah, this is the exact same kind of template as like Mystic Confluence in that cycle. So okay, yeah. After reading the card fully, I definitely think that we're going to be seeing a full Confluence cycle of 3 colors, 1 for each of the families. So yeah, this seems pretty good. I mean, it is limited being at sorcery speed, but still. I mean, you essentially can draw up to 3 cards and lose 3 life if you really need to. You can deal, up to 3 damage essentially to each creature and planeswalker you don't control, which can definitely be a nice mini board wipe, especially against token strategies. And probably the most impactful out of these, though, is you can put up to 3 lands from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. So yeah, a 5 mana ramp 3, yeah, that's really good. And again, it's a flexible one. And the fact that it lets you get lands out of your graveyard means that you're going to be missing with this. I mean, you're never going to miss with it because you've got other options, but the amount of times that you can actually get those 3 lands are going to be a lot more likely because, again, you might have an Evolving Wilds or Terramorphic Expanse or, like, an actual fetch land. You're going to have more chances to actually hit those lands, and getting 3 lands for 5 mana is incredible. So yeah, this has a great amount of flexibility, has 3 relevant modes, and yeah, I'm excited to see the other cards in this Confluence cycle, but this one, I think, a lot of Jund decks out there are going to like. I mean, Lord Windgrace is still one of the most popular Jund commanders out there, and yeah, I definitely think this is pretty good in that deck, getting you lands back from your graveyard into play. Next up, Weathered Sentinels, a 2/5 artifact creature wall that costs, I believe that's 3. Please correct me below in the comments if I'm misseeing that. It's kind of blurry, obviously. It has Defender, Vigilance, Reach, and Trample, so a lot of keywords there. Weathered Sentinel can attack players who attacked you during their last turn as though it didn't have Defender, so that's kind of spicy. And whenever Weathered Sentinels attacks, it gets +3/+3 and gains Indestructible until end of turn. Okay, I really like this card. That's spicy. So you've got a decent blocker again. I'm assuming it's a 2/5 for 3 mana, okay? So you got a decent blocker, a 2/5 with Reach. So yeah, you can block a decent amount of things. And if someone does decide to attack you, they've got to know that you might be coming back at them, actually, you pretty much are going to be coming back at them with this Sentinels. Because again, you can only attack a player who attacked you, so if only one of your opponents attacked you, that's going to be the player you attack, and you're pretty much always going to attack with this, because again, it has Vigilance, so it can always be back to block, and when it does attack, it gets +3/+3, so then it's what, a 5/8 Indestructible with Trample, so yeah, there's no reason not to attack, essentially, unless, your opponent has, like, Wither or Infect in play. So yeah, this is kind of like a good attack deterrent in certain circumstances. Obviously, it's going to work sometimes better than others. Sometimes if an opponent just has massive creatures in play, they're not going to care if you swing at them, even if this thing is indestructible, because they can just block it and it won't do anything to them. And of course, other times, if, everyone attacks you, then, you still have to make a decision on who you're going to attack with this. But yeah, I think it's a pretty spicy card. I can see this one seeing some play potentially, in more of like a group hug strategy, or a strategy where players are just like, politicking, you'd be like, no, don't attack me. Just hold back, do other things, because look, I mean, if you attack me, I'm going to have to attack you with this. But yeah, I think it's a pretty spicy card. I really like this design, and I'm excited to see what players can do with it. Okay, and then actually I was about to switch cards, and then I just thought, okay, yeah, how did I think about Arcades? Arcades is going to love this. Yeah, with Arcades, you can just attack anyway, so have fun. Okay, next up we've got this image, which has 6 cards in it. Actually, technically, a 7th in that top left, and I'll cover that one as well, though obviously the crop on that one's going to be a bit weird. So here we go. First up, we've got Wave of Rats, a 4/2 rat with Trample that costs 3 and a black. It has Blitz, and I think that's for 4 and a black, and again, Blitz is basically if you cast this spell for its Blitz cost, it gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card, sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. And when Wave of Rats dies, if it dealt combat damage to a player this turn, return to the battlefield under its owner's control. Okay, actually looking at the Blitz again, I might be very wrong in that 4. Maybe that's a 1. I am not sure. Anyways, yeah, I mean, this is just a repeatable attacker for you that essentially can just keep swinging. As long as it gets through, again, with that trample damage on an opponent, you can bring it back to the battlefield under your control. Now, obviously, 4 power is definitely not going to guarantee that you can get damage through, but of course, if you've got ways to, pump this or whatnot, yeah, I mean, you're going to be able to get more damage through and be able to actually ensure that you get that combat damage on a player to make sure you get it back if it died. Now, I can see this kind of being used potentially in maybe, an aristocrat style strategy where, you really care about your creatures dying and coming back, kind of like a reassembling skeletons, but in a way for free if you can keep getting this through and hitting an opponent. And obviously, I mean, it doesn't even have to die in combat, though. You know, if your opponents block it, it probably will with only 2 toughness, but they might not if you're getting a bunch of value out of it, you know, dying and coming back. But of course, in those kind of strategies, you also have another way to sacrifice this, so yeah, you can get that additional value out of it regardless. Now again, I think this card is pretty specific on kind of what decks want it. Again, that's just my initial gut reaction, and yeah, that blitz costing, you know, 2 in total versus 5 in total would make a decent amount of difference on whether, you know, this card's going to see playing more decks or less. And if it is just, you know, 2 mana essentially, yeah, blitzing this out on turn 2 to hit someone for 4, it dies, you draw a card, and this stays in play. Yeah, that's a lot better than, you know, obviously if they pay 5 mana for it. So, we'll see. Moving on, we've got Protection Racket, an enchantment for 2 and a black. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, repeat the following process for each opponent in turn order. Reveal the top card of your library. That player may pay life equal to that card's mana value. If they do, exile that card. Oh my goodness, what? If they do, exile that card. Otherwise, put it into your hand? So this is basically like Reverse Bob, but for 3 cards. Oh my goodness. So if your opponents aren't willing to pay whatever mana value, I mean, obviously, okay, if you hit lands, they're going to pay it because it's 0. But for any non-lands that you hit, they have to pay the life for it. And if they don't, you're just getting free cards off the top of your library. I mean, obviously, this is going to be, like, less consistent than a Phyrexian Arena. I mean, and you're paying the life for that as well. But this obviously has the potential to be like, okay, I mean, you hit 3 big things off the top of your library and your opponents don't want to, you know, pay the life for any of them. Then you get to draw 3 cards for just having this little enchantment in play. Yeah, that seems really good. Now, obviously, if you've got a lot of low-to-the-ground cards in your deck, your opponents are probably going to be more likely to pay, you know, 1 or 2 life. But again, if, you know, you have something that has a 5 converted mana cost or 6, that is pretty hefty, and most players are not going to be paying that, especially if you've got a strategy, you know, with your deck to actually drain your opponents a good amount or, you know, maybe punish them even further. Like maybe you've got a Wound Reflection in play, or Warlock class, I think, does it as well, essentially. But yeah, maybe you've got those kinds of cards in play that say, okay, if you pay life, you're going to be paying double, or, you know, sometimes even more than that. So yeah, I could be misreading this card entirely, but I think this card seems to be really good. Obviously, there are times where this can bust, where, you know, you hit 3 lands or 3 things that have a very small converted mana cost, and your opponents are willing to pay that, and you hit nothing off of this. In that case, you're still draining your opponents potentially for a little bit at least. But yeah, this has the potential to easily draw you 2 or 3 cards each trip around the table when you hit the right things and when you're in the right deck. And of course, again, if you've got top of the library manipulation in your deck as well, you can probably ensure that you've got some pretty hefty things on top that your opponents won't want to actually, you know, pay the life for. Also, keep in mind that if your deck revolves around like specific cards, you definitely are not going to want this, because if you end up hitting that off the top of the library with this and your opponent knows that that's like the, you know, key card in your deck and your deck revolves around that, they're probably going to be willing to pay the life to exile it. So keep that in mind. Moving on, though, Bellowing Mauler, a 4/6 Ogre Warrior for 4 and a black, it looks like. At the beginning of your end step, each player loses 4 life unless they sacrifice a non-token creature. I mean, yeah, that just seems pretty solid for an aristocrat-style strategy. We've seen this a similar effect to this one on other creatures. Their names are not coming to mind, but basically ones that essentially either on your upkeep or on your end step force everyone to sacrifice a creature. This one does give the option that players, you know, can, you know, pay 4 life instead. So, whereas you probably have ways to gain value from sacrificing your creatures, your opponents might not, and they might not be willing to sacrifice a creature, so they'll pay the 4 life instead, or they're going to have to once they're getting low on life. And yeah, keep in mind that this does specify non-token creature, which is probably going to benefit you a good amount. You know, if you're playing against token strategies, they can't sacrifice, you know, just a tiny token that doesn't matter all that much. They have to sacrifice an actual meaningful creature, you know, if they don't want to pay that 4 life. Moving on, next up we've got Industrial Advancement, an enchantment for 3 in a red. It says at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is that creature's mana value. You may put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield, put the rest of them on your library in a random order. Okay, this is really spicy, and my goodness, are there some pretty big plays that you can have with it. I mean, my mind immediately goes to creatures that you can either cheat into play, or creatures that might have, you know, a reduction for their cost depending on certain factors, like Primeval Protector. That's the first one that came to my mind. I just couldn't think of the name until now. I think that one's like 11 mana. So, yeah, but you're usually just casting it kind of like a Blasphemous Act, because it counts, I think, your opponent's creatures. So it usually just costs like 1 mana for this giant 10/10. But now with this in play at your end step, you're just like, okay, I'll sacrifice my Primeval Protector, look at the top 11 cards of my library, and then put whatever creature from among them I want onto the battlefield directly. So yeah, you definitely can have some really spicy plays with this. I mean, I also can see players, using and abusing ETBs and LTBs of some massive creatures with this too, by just saying, okay, cool. Yeah, I got my Trastodon in play with this. I don't really want my Trastodon anymore. Let's just, go look at the top, 8 cards in my library and get something else massive to come into play that maybe also has a giant ETB. And yeah, there are definitely situations where you don't even have to work that hard to get massive creatures into play, because if you've got ways to set the top of your library or get a specific creature on top of your library, and yeah, there are plenty of ways to do that, then you can just cheat that specific creature in play just by, sacrificing any creature that has a mana value of 1 or greater, essentially. So yeah, like I've said, this is a very spicy card, and I can see some massive plays happening from it. And yeah, I mean, again, if you are building around those ETBs and LTBs, maybe another way to take advantage of this is to kind of double up on this trigger as well, something like a Psionic Resonator, so that, yeah, you sacrifice a creature, you get things off the top, or sorry, you get a creature off the top, and then you sacrifice that creature to get something else. So yeah, this can kind of lead and chain from one thing to the other. Definitely an interesting card, definitely a unique one, and definitely one that I think a good amount of players out there are going to be excited about. Moving forward, though, next up we've got Mezio Mugger, a 3/3 Vashino Rogue that costs 4 and a red. It has, whenever it attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. You may play those cards this turn. You may spend mana as or mana of any color to cast those spells. And this does have a blitz cost, which we can read this time, it looks like, of 2 and a red. So, yeah, I mean, this just seems kind of like Atali. It's kind of like an Atali, but with a smaller effect. Again, you do get to exile the top card of everyone's library, including your own, just like Atali, but you can't cast those spells for free, so kind of glad we don't have a second Atali running around. That being said, this does allow you to essentially perfectly fix your mana for those spells, and yeah, giving you access to 4 cards that, again, you can play, not just cast, so you can play lands off the top, including your opponents. Yeah, that seems to be pretty effective. This can give you a good amount of card advantage. That being said, yeah, this is probably not going to survive combat too often, and hence why it does have the blitz mechanic on it, so that you can essentially just do this for 3 mana. You draw a card when it dies anyways, and yeah, you can do this essentially once to get access to 4 cards. Now, obviously, that being said, if you've got ways to protect it or pump it and, keep it alive in combat, great, you can get more value out of it, but yeah, I think for the most part, it's probably going to be a one-off, minor Atali effect. Next up, we've got Reign of Riches, an enchantment for 3 red. When it enters the battlefield, you're going to create 2 treasure tokens. The first spell you cast each turn that mana from a treasure was spent to cast has Cascade. All right, that's pretty spicy. Here we go. So, yeah, I mean, first up, a 5 mana enchantment that gives you 2 of the mana back. Yeah, sure, I'll take 2 treasures. Especially when I use those treasures to cast spells, then, I essentially can cascade from that, which can absolutely be incredible. And of course, keep in mind this counts the first spell you cast on each turn, not just on your turn. So yes, there is a limitation that it's not going to be like more than 1 spell on your turn, but it allows you to do so on your opponent's turns as well. So yeah, my mind immediately goes to like, oh yeah, I'll just cast Dig Through Time with 1 treasure, and then get a giant, I can't remember how big Dig Through Time is, 9? 8? You get, a massive spell cascading off from that. And of course, yeah, I mean, obviously you're not limited to just the 2 treasures that this makes. If you've got other ways to make treasures in your deck, like, like a Brass's Bounty or something like that, cool, I can hit something massive, by just casting my Brass's Bounty with one of these Cascade treasure tokens, essentially. I'll hit something else with that, I'll make a ton of treasure with that, and then I'll utilize those treasures to cast other spells, again, on my opponent's turns with instants, or on my own turn, just cascade into more and more value. So yeah, this thing is pretty crazy, especially in a deck that has a ton of ways to make treasures, or if you've got a commander that can make treasure, this is a slam dunk in that deck. Cascade is just free additional value, and yeah, there's some pretty crazy things that you can do with it, and being able to get, basically an extra spell for free on every single turn if you're able to utilize, a treasure on every single turn to do so, that's going to be very powerful. Okay, and I know I said that the last image had 7 cards on it because the top left card was different. But now after going forward and seeing this image, yeah, that same image is in the bottom left. So we'll talk about that one here in a bit, all right? But first, let's start off with Turf War, an enchantment for 4 and a red that says, when it enters the battlefield, for each player, put a contested counter on target land that player controls. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, if that player controls one or more lands with contested counters on them, that creature's controller gains control of one of those lands of their choice and untaps it. Yeah, I did not expect land theft in one of these Commander Precons, and yeah, I'm really trying to process this one because this is definitely something that's pretty off the wall. And yeah, obviously when this enters the battlefield, you're probably going to want to target, their most effective lands. I mean, if someone's got a Gaia's Cradle, great. Now it can be your Gaia's Cradle, or actually, it could be pretty much anyone's Gaia's Cradle. But yeah, obviously you want to target the lands that are kind of most impactful. And then essentially, yeah, when players start hitting each other, if they've got less lands than the other player, they get to take one of those contested lands. And obviously it does say of their choice, because if a player takes multiple contested lands, then you're going to be able to, have a decision when you actually hit them too. Yeah, this can make things decently chaotic and really incentivize players to attack each other, so that can definitely be interesting. And obviously this can, lead to a very big swing even on the turn that it comes down. If you, say, have this come down and you've got less lands than your opponents, and you bring creatures through on each one of them and you deal combat damage to them, you can end up stealing a decent amount of lands and then, yeah, get decently ahead. Now, that being said, obviously, when you start stealing players' lands, they're probably going to try to steal them back and then steal even more lands. So, yeah, you can also paint a target on your back when you do this. So, yeah, this can just lead to a lot of players attacking quite a bit. And, yeah, a group slug strategy is probably going to be utilizing this to great effect. Regardless, yeah, I was thrown off by that last card because land theft. Did not see that coming. Anyways, this one probably isn't going to be as weird, right? Chaldea Guardian. Chaldea. Anyways, a 4/3 human soldier, 4/3 and a green. Whenever it or another creature with mana value 4 or greater dies, create 2 1/1 green and white citizen creature tokens. Okay. This also has blitz for 2 and a green. So obviously, you could just blitz this in, attack with it, draw a card, when it dies, and also, when it also dies, you're going to be making 2 1/1 citizens. So yeah, this is definitely pretty interesting. If you've got some creatures that maybe can recur themselves that have, a high converted mana cost, or not high, I guess, but, middle of the road 4 or higher, maybe like a Phyto Titan, which can keep coming back again and again and again, you can just keep sacrificing that for value to make more and more creatures. And I'm sure there are plenty of decks out there that are like, yeah, I've got a decent amount of large creatures and I also like tokens, maybe decks that, include like Avenger of Zendikar obviously kind of meets that requirement, and maybe there's some other creatures in there too, like, a Hornet Queen as well, that cares about making tokens and also, is just a large body itself. So yeah, this could definitely benefit decks like that. Another place this might be able to fit, though, is a Reanimator deck, or a deck that's looking, for creatures to die and come back. And yeah, if you've got a decent amount of creatures that are dying, that are large, and they come back, you can make a ton of tokens of this very quickly. So yeah, I don't think that this card is, just specifically just for, a token strategy, because many token strategies out there might not have creatures that, have all that high of a mana value, so they might not meet that requirement. But again, if you've got a decent amount of large creatures in your deck and, you can benefit from making tokens, cool, this is just a nice additional benefit to have. Okay, this has got to be my favorite name out of all the cards so far. Dodgy Jalopy. That is a fantastic name. Probably the best name from this entire set in Precon so far. A star 5 vehicle, a trample, cost 2 and a green. Its power is equal to the highest mana value among creatures you control. That's nice. And it's got crew 3, and it's got a scavenge cost. Scavenge is back for 2 and a green. So Scavenge, I think, was in one of the Ravnica sets a while back. Basically, by paying 2 and a green, exile this card from your graveyard, put a number of counters equal to this card's power to target creature. Scavenge only is a sorcery. So that's pretty spicy. Okay, again, if you've got, a deck that revolves around some massive creatures, maybe my mind again went to Primeval Protector is probably, the best examples that you could probably have for, or the best things to have in play essentially for this. I believe it has, 11 mana value, essentially. So, yeah, this Dodgy Jalopy, 3 mana, 3 crew cost, vehicle, can swing for 11 with Trample as well, which is just lovely. And then, of course, when this is actually dealt with, or, if you just discard your graveyard or whatnot, you can scavenge it away for just 3 mana again. And if you've got, again, that massive mana value creature in play, again, just Primeval Protector or whatnot, that's 11 counters on something. So, yeah, this can make a big impact, while it's on the field, and then also while it's in your graveyard too. And of course, just the art and the name are fantastic. So, yeah, this is a pretty spicy card. And, yeah, it can definitely hit hard in the right deck with, high mana value creatures. And, oh, how did I don't know how I missed this. Galta loves this card. How did I miss that? I built a dinosaurs and cars deck. Okay, yeah, this is a slam dunk in Galta. My goodness, is this a slam dunk in that deck? Obviously, you can help get Galta in play pretty easily because, yeah, if you've got a decent, high mana value creature that's already out, you just crew this, you're going to be able to reduce Galta's power enough to be able to easily cast Galta. And then when Galta is in play, this is what, a 12-5? And then if this is in your graveyard as well, when Galta is in play, yeah, just scavenge it away for 3. And now Galta all of a sudden gets 12 more counters on, one-shot KO. Yeah, slam dunking Galta. I can't believe I didn't see that right away. Love the name. Love the card. Awesome. All right, now we get to that card that was, that top left corner of, the previous image, but now it's in this one. Here we go. First Responder. A 3/3 Ogre Citizen with Vigilance that costs 3 in a green. It has, at the beginning of your end step, you may return another creature you control to its owner's hand, then put a number of +1 counters equal to that creature's power on first Responder. Okay, so yeah, I mean, there are already, decks out there that like to utilize creatures or effects that can bounce a creature back to their hand because, well, you might want to recast that creature if they've got, a cast trigger or an ETB or an LTB or whatnot. So yeah, there's already creatures out there that do see some play in specific decks that like that. And yeah, I mean, this would be obviously more powerful if you could choose where those counters go. This just going on first Responder, is nice. It does have Vigilance, so you can just keep swinging with it. It's going to get pretty large. It doesn't have Trample or anything like that. If you can give it Trample, obviously, that's a great way to get a ton of damage through eventually. But yeah, maybe a Fling deck would like this one as well. A deck that cares about getting creatures to have a high power, because then you could just keep growing this thing massively throughout the game. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a slam dunk in any deck that comes to my mind, in comparison to some of the other spicy cards we've seen so far. Not that it's a bad card, but yeah, nothing comes to mind right now. So in the comments below, let me know if you think of something. Next up, we've got Next of Kin. That wasn't planned. Anyways, Aura, that costs 2 and a green. It says Enchant Creature. When enchanted creature dies, you may put a creature card you own with lesser mana value from your hand or from the command zone onto the battlefield. Okay. If you do, return Next of Kin to the battlefield attached to that creature at the beginning of the next end step. Okay, so, Gift of Immortality, but for different creature? Kind of. That seems powerful, and also I think this is one of the very few ways that you can kind of cheat your commander out from the command zone. Not counting commanders actually cheat themselves out, but yeah, I mean, that seems good. I mean, my initial thoughts on this is that this seems very powerful. I mean, again, the downside to auras is that essentially once that creature dies, the aura is just in your graveyard, and then, yeah, I mean, you just kind of lose out on that additional value. But with this one, obviously, the aura comes back. So you can just keep repeatedly, of course, if you've got sacrifice outlets as well, just keep repeatedly getting things, from your hand into play, getting things from your command zone into play, and then just keep getting this back and probably, really taking advantage of creatures, again, that might have ETBs or LTBs. And yeah, this just seems like a ton of value for just 3 mana. Now, that being said, obviously your opponents can stop this from happening if they're able to, take this out, which can be pretty tough, again, if you've got something like a free sacrifice outlet in play, because you can just be like, all right, well, you targeted it, cool. I'll sacrifice my creature, this will go to my graveyard, and I'm going to get it back later, after I get a creature with lesser mana value from my hand or commands on the battlefield. Now, obviously, there is that requirement that you need a creature to meet that. If you don't have a creature in your hand with lesser mana value or, in your command zone, you're not going to be able to cheat it out. That being said, something that I'm realizing now is that this does not at all care about commander tax, because obviously that doesn't change your commander's mana value. Your commander just has whatever mana value it is. So even if your commanders died like 8 times, it would be plus 16 commander tax. That doesn't matter at all. If you've got a creature in play that's got a higher converted mana cost than your commander, and this is on it, and then that creature dies, you can cheat your commander into play with this. So yeah, that seems quite powerful. And yeah, obviously the other ways to stop would be just to exile this card from a graveyard when it's in there, or, to take out the creature that it is going to come to play back on. That being said, yeah, this seems like a pretty powerful card, and one that I'm excited to see what players are going to be doing with it. But I believe we have finally gotten to our last card with Grime Gorger. This is a 3/3 horror with Menace that costs 2 black and a green, and it says, when it attacks, exile up to 1 card of each card type from the depending player's graveyard. Put a +1 counter on Grime Gorger for each card exiled this way. So, no offense to Grime Gorger, but not the best for last. But still a decent card, yeah. This is some decent graveyard removal. Obviously, you can, take out, a decent amount of cards from a player's graveyard if they've got, a land, instant sorcery, creature, whatnot. you can get a decent amount of counters on this and make it, you know, pretty deadly pretty quickly. Again, it does have Menace, so your opponents are going to have a hard time blocking it. They have to at least assign 2 creatures to it if they do want to block it. So if they don't even have 2 creatures, cool, you can get through on them with that. That being said, you know, there are going to be times where your opponents don't have many cards in their graveyard, and if you don't, you know, have ways to actually mill your opponents, then this might not be growing, like, at all if you're attacking with it. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, you know, where you might want this card, because, yeah, in a mill strategy, you're probably not going to try to win through combat, and yeah, that's probably not the direction that you're going. And also, since you do have to attack the actual player that you're going to be exiling cards from, there might be some situations where you're attacking into a bad situation, but you really want to get rid of specific cards in their graveyard, so you might just have to kind of lose Grime Gorger instead of, you know, like other creatures. The name's escaping me right now. It's a 2-mana ooze. Scavenging Ooze, of course. Okay, anyways, Scavenging Ooze, you can, you know, just exile cards, you know, as you will. You know, by paying mana, you can just exile cards from anyone's graveyard, essentially, and it also can grow and gain you life, too. But yeah, I don't think this is going to have a huge impact in a lot of decks out there. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, and maybe there's specific decks that really want this. So yeah, let me know in the comments below. And yeah, thank you for bearing with me with this different kind of quick take. And yeah, I'm excited to hear what your thoughts are on all these cards. So why don't you let me know what your favorite one is out of all these cards in the comments below. And also, let me know what I messed up on, because I'm sure there are things that I made mistakes on.